Barbara Ann McNeely was the kind of young woman who left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Born on June 30, 1957, in the small town of Granby, Missouri, she was deeply rooted in her community, faith, and family. She had grown up in Granby, lived with her parents for her entire life, and had never strayed far from home. Her upbringing had been stable and warm, surrounded by the love of her parents, siblings, and grandparents. She was active in the Granby United Methodist Church, where she taught a fourth-grade Sunday school class. Her kindness and compassion extended beyond her church involvement. She carried herself with a quiet grace that many admired. Barbara graduated from East Newton High School in 1975, where she had participated in a variety of student events and had been crowned homecoming queen in 1974. Her life was one marked by steady achievement, strong morals, and community involvement. She was pursuing higher education as a junior at Missouri Southern State College in Joplin and held a part-time job at J.C. She split her working hours between the store at Northpark Mall in Joplin and another location in Pittsburgh, Kansas. On September 7, 1977, Barbara followed a routine she had done many times before. She worked her scheduled shift at the Joplin J.C. location until 4:30 p.m., then drove roughly 45 minutes east to the Pittsburgh store to cover additional hours. She remained there until around 7:30 p.m., then made her way back to Joplin. It was the kind of double-shift arrangement she had handled without complaint. She was known as reliable, hardworking, and never one to shy away from responsibility. Around 8:30 p.m., Barbara parked her car on the east side of Northpark Mall, just north of the J.C. store where she worked. She was likely returning to retrieve something or to check in before leaving for the night. What happened next shocked not only her family and friends but the entire Joplin community. Within minutes of arriving at the mall, Barbara was viciously attacked. The assault took place inside her vehicle, a detail confirmed by the blood spatter and forensic evidence collected later by police. She had been stabbed repeatedly. The force and ferocity of the attack were immediately apparent. Barbara managed to open her door and stumble out of the car. Bleeding heavily from multiple stab wounds, she struggled across the parking lot to Kinney's shoe store, a nearby shop still open at the time. She staggered inside and pleaded for help before collapsing on the floor. Bystanders and employees were horrified. Emergency responders were called immediately, and Barbara was transported to St. John's Medical Center by ambulance. Despite the efforts of medical staff, she succumbed to her injuries at 10:30 p.m., just 2 hours after the attack. The initial police investigation began that night. The brutality of the crime, the randomness of the location, and the complete lack of motive left detectives scrambling. Police Lieutenant Charles Brewer of the Joplin Police Department released a statement to the public early the next morning, pleading for assistance from anyone who might have been in the parking lot between 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m. Detectives canvassed the area, questioned mall employees and patrons, and began piecing together Barbara's last known movements. Jasper County Coroner Dr. Wendell Fuhr performed the autopsy. He determined that Barbara had been stabbed 21 times. The wounds were concentrated in a small area of the chest and back. Although she had not been sexually assaulted, Dr. Fuhr did not rule out the possibility that the nature of the crime indicated a sadistic motive. He identified the probable fatal wound as a deep stab to the neck. The sheer number of wounds in their confined location suggested not only rage but a frenzied psychological state. Police recovered a pocketknife at the scene, located in some bushes near where Barbara's car had been parked. It was quickly determined to be the murder weapon. Inside her vehicle, police found her purse. Although its contents had been disturbed, there was no immediate indication that robbery was the motive. The location, method, and absence of witnesses left detectives without a clear direction. However, a lead emerged involving a suspicious vehicle seen leaving the mall parking lot at a high rate of speed shortly after the attack. Witnesses reported seeing a late model van, painted in a mix of blue, green, and white, peeling away from the area. The van was reportedly occupied by 2 white males. One man was described as approximately 21 to 24 years old, around 6 feet tall, weighing 180 to 190 pounds, with brown hair. He was seen wearing a yellow football jersey with white numbers and yellow shorts. The second man was said to be around 20 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighing about 160 pounds, and wearing a long-sleeved shirt and black slacks. Despite the distribution of these descriptions to local law enforcement agencies and the public, the tip led nowhere. The police made a formal appeal for help in retracing Barbara's movements for the 24 hours prior to the attack, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have seen something relevant. But the case remained without a clear suspect. The breakthrough came not from a piece of forensic evidence or a critical witness but from the suspect himself. 2 days after the murder, a young man named William Robert McMurray II walked into a police station in Joplin. He claimed to have witnessed the stabbing and said he wanted to help. He told officers that he had been at the mall the night of the murder and had seen 2 men commit the crime. When asked why he had not come forward earlier, he said he had been scared. Police listened carefully. His story was strange and inconsistent. As they pressed further, he admitted to having found a knife at the scene, growing frightened, and tossing it into nearby bushes before leaving the area. This caught the attention of investigators. A knife had indeed been found in the bushes near the parking lot, but that detail had not yet been released to the public. Now under suspicion, McMurray was asked to provide a full statement. He complied and, in time, confessed to the murder. He described his actions, the location of the knife, and how he had washed up after the attack. He told detectives he had driven to the west side of Joplin, stopped at a service station at 7th Street in Monroe, and cleaned his hands. Then, he drove to the low water bridge at Shoal Creek, where he washed again in the stream, discarded his shirt, and returned to his dormitory at Ozark Bible College. McMurray had enrolled at Ozark Bible College only weeks earlier. He had come from Indiana and had a deeply troubled past. His childhood had been marked by instability, neglect, and abuse. He had lived in foster homes, state institutions, and with various relatives. There were repeated episodes of trauma, including physical abuse at the hands of family members. McMurray's mother had divorced and remarried several times, moving from Indiana to California, Florida, and back again. By the time he arrived in Joplin in August 1977, he was desperate for a fresh start. At trial, the prosecution and defense entered into a stipulation of facts. This meant both parties agreed on key details of the crime, including McMurray's confession and the forensic evidence linking him to the murder. Because of this stipulation, the prosecution called only 2 witnesses and spent just over 30 minutes presenting its case. The defense, however, prepared a much more complex picture. They planned to show that McMurray was suffering from a severe mental disease at the time of the murder. He was represented by public defenders Charles Buchanan and David Robards, who argued that McMurray was legally insane. Psychiatric testimony played a central role. Dr. Henry Bratkowski, a psychiatrist from Fulton State Hospital, testified that the murder had been the result of a break from reality. According to Dr. Bratkowski, McMurray had experienced a delusional episode triggered by emotional stress, isolation, and unresolved trauma. He believed he saw his mother's face in Barbara McNeely and, in a paranoid delusion, believed he was striking back against a lifelong tormentor. Under the influence of a drug administered during psychiatric evaluation, McMurray relived the stabbing and described it in terms that revealed deep psychological disassociation. He called it an act of desperation against his tormentor, believing it was the only way to free himself from the emotional and psychological pain he carried. Dr. Sadashiv Parwadikar, another psychiatrist, confirmed that McMurray was not suffering from any organic brain disease but instead exhibited a profound psychological disorder. He stated that being on his own for the first time, combined with the pressures of adapting to a new life, had caused McMurray to mentally collapse. As the trial progressed, the jury listened carefully. The emotional toll on Barbara's family was immense. They sat through each session, hearing every painful detail of their daughter's final moments. Friends and classmates filled the courtroom. Some wept openly. The public's attention was fixed on the case, which had stunned a community that considered itself peaceful and safe. The defense made no effort to deny that McMurray had killed Barbara McNeely. Their only goal was to convince the jury that he was not criminally responsible due to mental disease or defect. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as the trial entered its final days. The legal question was not whether William McMurray had killed Barbara McNeely. That fact was undisputed. The issue was whether he could be held legally responsible for his actions. To resolve this, the jury had to decide whether McMurray was suffering from a mental disease or defect so severe that he either did not understand what he was doing, or did not understand that it was wrong. The defense continued building its argument with more insight into McMurray's life and fragile mental state. Testimony detailed his troubled childhood, marked by abuse, instability, and trauma. His mother had divorced multiple times and moved frequently, taking McMurray across Indiana, Florida, and California. At one point, his stepfather held his head underwater in a violent outburst. He had undergone surgery more than 20 times for throat issues and was often hospitalized. He was placed in 2 different foster homes and eventually spent several years in the Indiana Christian Children's Home at Ladoga, where he graduated from high school. According to testimony, McMurray's return to Ladoga in the summer of 1977 had triggered emotional conflict. He had an argument with his mother, during which he told her he did not want to see her again. She told him she hated him. Shortly thereafter, he left Indiana and came to Joplin to start a new life at Ozarks Bible College. He arrived hopeful, but alone. The weight of his unresolved trauma, isolation, and emerging mental illness intensified. Witnesses for the defense described McMurray as someone struggling to maintain a sense of control over his emotions. He had long-standing issues related to his mother and viewed other women through that psychological lens. According to Dr. Bratkowski, McMurray did not plan the attack. Rather, it erupted during a dissociative episode. In his mind, he believed he was attacking the source of his pain, his mother. He saw her face reflected in Barbara McNeely. The knife was a means of emotional release in a moment of delusion, not a premeditated weapon. Dr. Bratkowski explained that McMurray's episode at the mall represented what psychiatrists call derealization, a dissociative state in which the individual no longer perceives reality accurately. McMurray experienced a loss of identity and control, falling into a dream-like state that ultimately culminated in violence. He later described being confused and unable to understand what he had done, only realizing it after the fact. The defense also pointed out that McMurray did not attempt to flee town or cover up the crime. In fact, he confessed voluntarily to police. He came forward under the pretense of being a witness, and though he initially lied about seeing others commit the crime, he eventually admitted that he was the one responsible. He even told investigators where they could find the murder weapon. The pocket knife was discovered exactly where he said he had thrown it. His fingerprints were on the vehicle, blood evidence was found on his wristwatch, and a strand of Barbara's hair was discovered on his clothing. All of this evidence solidified that McMurray was the killer, but it also supported the defense's argument that he was not hiding from his actions. He was trying to explain them in the only way he knew how, though even he admitted in his own words, "I don't know exactly what I was feeling." The jury was left to decide a difficult question. If McMurray was mentally ill to the point of delusion, did that absolve him of criminal responsibility? The prosecution had presented the evidence cleanly and succinctly, but they had offered no motive and no theory to counter the defense's psychiatric evaluation. McMurray's defense team had successfully portrayed him as a deeply damaged young man, overwhelmed by his past and unable to process his emotions in a rational way. On January 28, 1978, the jury returned its verdict. After 16 hours of deliberation, they found William Robert McMurray not guilty of capital murder by reason of mental disease or defect. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of silence, shock, and quiet grief. Judge Ben Pyle immediately committed McMurray to the custody of the Missouri State Division of Mental Health. He was to be held in a state mental hospital indefinitely, subject to psychiatric evaluation and treatment. Judge Pyle acknowledged the emotional difficulty of the case. He told the jurors that he understood the pain it had caused and did not disagree with their decision. Some members of the public gallery wept. Barbara's family sat with stoic resolve, heartbroken that their daughter's killer would not be punished in the conventional way. But the law had been followed. The news rippled through the community. Many people in Joplin were shocked that someone could commit such a brutal crime and not face prison time. Others were relieved that a young man with severe mental illness would be treated rather than condemned. The case became one of the first major capital murder trials in Jasper County to test Missouri's revised criminal responsibility laws. Barbara's funeral had already taken place months before, shortly after the murder. She had been laid to rest at Granby Memorial Cemetery following services at the Granby United Methodist Church. Her parents, Bill and Mary McNeely, were surrounded by friends, extended family, and neighbors. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to a woman remembered for her kindness, ambition, and strong moral compass. In the aftermath of the trial, Barbara's family and community members worked to ensure her memory would live on. A scholarship fund was established in her name at East Newton High School. Contributions poured in from local businesses, churches, and citizens. Each year, the scholarship would go to a student who embodied the same spirit that Barbara had, someone committed to kindness, leadership, and service. The J.C. Penney store at Northpark Mall closed for several hours on the morning of her funeral, allowing co-workers to attend. Many of them remembered Barbara not just as a diligent employee, but as a gentle and thoughtful friend. Years passed. McMurray remained in the state hospital for treatment. For a time, he faded from public view. But in 2010, he re-emerged in a way that reignited grief and controversy. McMurray reached out to journalist and former classmate Randy Turner after Turner published a blog post memorializing Barbara. In a brief and unexpected message, McMurray wrote, "I'm so very, very sorry for what I did." This note, though simple, stirred strong reactions. Some saw it as an overdue act of contrition. Others viewed it as a shallow attempt at absolution. McMurray had lived a relatively quiet life since his release from the hospital. He had married, fathered children, and reportedly worked as a firefighter in northern Missouri. The family of Barbara McNeely had not been notified of his release, a fact that added a bitter layer to their decades-old grief. Her murder was a tragedy, an act of violence that defied logic. But it also became a touchstone for conversations about mental health, justice, and forgiveness. The case of Barbara McNeely and William McMurray remains one of the most memorable and painful events in Joplin's history. There were many unanswered questions. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Should there have been better oversight for a young man with a history of mental illness? Was justice truly served? These questions continue to linger, echoing in the hearts of those who knew Barbara and those who have come to know her story. More than 40 years later, Barbara Ann McNeely is remembered not as a victim, but as a vibrant young woman full of promise. Her life was short, but it was meaningful. Her legacy lives on in scholarships, in community memory, and in every conversation that honors victims of violence. And somewhere in Missouri, the man who took her life lives with the knowledge of what he did, and the possibility that some sliver of understanding, remorse, or redemption might follow him for the rest of his days.